of the town.
नमस्ते कार्यक्रम टक अफ द टाउनमा म विवेक सिंह ठकुरी यहाँलाई स्वागत गर्न चाहन्छु। भूकम्पीय दृष्टिकोणले नेपाल विश्वमै 11औं स्थानमा एकदम रिस्क जोनमा पर्छ भनेदेखि यदि काठमाडौँ शहरको कुरा गर्ने हो भने काठमाडौँ सिटीको कुरा गर्ने हो भने विश्वको सम्पूर्ण शहरहरूमध्ये नम्बर 1 मा अर्थात् पहिलो स्थानमा काठमाडौँ शहर पर्छ। अनुमान गरिए अनुसार यदि 9 म्याग्निट्युडको भूकम्प आएमा अथवा त्योभन्दा बढीको भूकम्प आएमा काठमाडौँ शहरमा करिब 1 लाख व्यक्तिको तत्काल मृत्यु हुने अनुमान गरिएको छ भने 2 लाख व्यक्तिहरू सिरियसली इन्जर्ड हुने अनुमान गरिएको छ। यो किसिमको पृष्ठभूमि राख्दै आजको कार्यक्रम सुरुवात गर्ने अनुमति चाहन्छौँ। यदि यो किसिमको अवस्था आउने हो भनेदेखि हामीहरूको जिम्मेवारी के रहन्छ त? सरकारको, सरोकारवालाहरूको, प्राइभेट सेक्टरको र नागरिकको जिम्मेवारी के रहन्छ त? यसै विषयको वरिपरि रहेर आजको हामी छलफललाई अगाडि बढाउनेछौँ र स्पेशली आजको छलफलमा हामी अलिकति पब्लिक प्राइभेट पार्टनरशिपको बारेमा बढी छलफल गर्नेछौँ। किनभनेदेखि हामीसँग जो व्यक्ति आज गेस्टको रूपमा हामीसँग उपस्थित हुनुहुन्छ यस कार्यक्रममा उहाँ यस विषयमा स्पेशलाइज्ड पर्सन एक्सपर्ट हुनुहुन्छ। उहाँ हुनुहुन्छ माइकल सिल्भरम्यान। Michael is the regional global development alliance builder for South and Southeast Asia based at the USAID regional mission Asia in Bangkok, Thailand. And his role, and in this role, Michael is responsible for assisting the companies and USAID offices in South and Southeast Asia in developing and supporting public-private partnerships by identifying the opportunities where companies and business interests and USAID's development objectives can both be achieved. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Did I cover all that?
I think you did it well and all in one sentence. That's not bad.
Thank you so much. Okay, Michael, let's start off on a very light note. What's the impression that you get when you see Kathmandu, when your plane's about to land, when it's descending, and when you see the whole geography of Kathmandu? What's the first impression that you get?
Well, this is about the 4th or 5th time that I've been in Kathmandu. In fact, as I was telling you, the first time I was here was probably 1971-72. It's always a pleasure to come to Kathmandu. It's Nepal is one of my favorite countries. The last time I was here, I brought my wife and my young son to see it. So I've seen the changes. I'm learning a lot more about sort of the development of the country. I'm speaking to people that I've never spoken to before. So it's very, very exciting to be here. And I'm very impressed with the quality of people that I'm working with over the last week.
And talking about people, the Nepalese, what's your impression about the people?
Very generous and gracious people. When I come, I feel very, very welcome. People have been extremely courteous in sort of meeting any needs that I have. In the hotel industry or in the offices that I'm working with, if I have one more cup of coffee or one more cup of tea during the day, it's probably going to be 5 too many. But it's been a fantastic experience as always.
Yeah, if it's okay to ask you, can I ask you where you're originally from, where you're born?
So I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States, and for the last 30, 40 years I've been living in Vermont, which is in sort of the corner of the United States.
Okay. So with a little experience that you have with interacting with the Nepalese people themselves and your extensive exposure and your experience of interacting with various people across the world, what kind of feeling do you get when it comes to planning and being more planned or being the laid-back type or casual type?
Right.
Where do you rate the Nepalese in that way?
I have to say it's often very hard for me to make comparisons because every culture has its own uniqueness. I think that what I've seen, at least in my experience on this trip, is interestingly enough, because I'm working with the private sector, I'm working with INSET, a fantastic organization doing work. The level of the qualifications of the people and the professionalism that I have seen during the last week has been quite remarkable. Something that I sometimes don't see when I go to other countries in the region. This has really been an excellent visit.
Yeah.
Remember.
So, Michael, as I understand when we were talking off air as well, that you're kind of like responsible and looking after the public-private partnership of USAID's portfolios, and in that regard, you've been here a few times already. But what has been your main objective of visiting Nepal this time around?
The main objective of this visit has been to work with the Office for Disaster Assistance, which is the arm of the U.S. government that is responsible for responding to disasters, but also to look at how do we reduce the risk of disasters, how do we save lives when and if a disaster will occur. And so one of the contractors that we work with here in Nepal is INSET. And INSET is responsible for, one of the things that we've asked them to do is to develop public-private partnerships to look at disaster management and particularly reducing the risk. And so my job has been this week to work with INSET staff to meet with the private sector, all of the stakeholders that would be impacted by a disaster in the country, and identify how is it that we would be able to, again, reduce the risk so that we can save people's lives, businesses can get up and running as quickly as possible after a disaster, and to make plans to do that, and have them work with us to implement some activities.
Yeah, Michael, it might be a little obvious, but still I would want if you could shed some light on this regard. Like, what has been the fundamental differences that you've observed in when it comes to disaster risk management in developed countries versus the third world countries or developing countries like Nepal?
Well, I think that, you know, I have to say that my specialty is really the public-private partnerships. I don't really, my specialty really isn't disaster management and disaster risk reduction. What I can say is that in talking to the private sector and looking and having conversations with bankers and talking to insurance companies and talking to hotel associations, there seems to be certainly an awareness of the dangers of a prospective earthquake, and an awareness that it would be in everybody's best interest if we could start looking at ways to reduce the risk of the earthquake. So from that perspective, it's been very, very positive. Every conversation I've had so far, people have been very optimistic about where the opportunities might be, and so we have a work ahead of us to look at how can we put all this together in a program.
Michael, I was wondering, like, whether you've had that opportunity to make a comparative observation of the progress that we have made. I don't know, I'm not aware that whether you were looking after this portfolio from a little while earlier or not, but if you were, it would be really interesting to know, like, you know, the awareness, has it been taken into actions? Because, you know, to be a little critical, what we often feel in Nepal is to be a little critical on ourselves, that plans and programs and awareness has been really great in every sector in Nepal, but the implementation part has always been pretty weak. So, you know, what has been your observation in that side?
Yeah, again, as we were just talking, I really don't have any kind of long-term relationship with this. What I can say is that INSAT, the organization, again, we're working with, one of the programs that they've been implementing, I think fairly successfully, is an awareness about a media campaign to get to raise people's awareness of the dangers of an earthquake. We're working now with the media, the FM's network, FMC, to answer that. No, this is FM station.
Okay, the radio, FM stations, radio stations,
So we had that discussion, is awareness is one thing, how do we then translate that into behavior change? And how do we know that people are learning? So we're going to be looking at trying to identify a process to start identifying that. But in addition to that, the other piece of information that I think has been very interesting for us is when we were talking to contractors who are responsible, and engineers that are responsible for designing and building earthquake-resistant infrastructure, you know, homes or commercial buildings, customers are asking them, is this earthquake resistant? Is the design earthquake resistant? That alone indicates an awareness, and there's going to be a consumer demand being placed, being asked of both the conductors builders to build me, and people are going to be investing in earthquake-resistant buildings. So I think that that's an excellent indication that awareness has been raised.
Yeah, we're like, I'm wondering, like, from the lens of yeah, I can understand that you're more, you're a public-private partnership, you look into that portfolio, but if you look at it from the lens of a person who would be looking at infrastructures, if they are like the earthquake resistant or not, and I'm sure you've traveled across the little lanes of Kathmandu a lot this time around. So how did you feel like when you saw all those buildings at Tamil or other little lanes?
I didn't know really that much about this being an earthquake-prone zone. I knew something about it. The more I heard stories about it, the more nervous I would get going into having to walk up 5 stories. Having said that, what I would also like to say is that one of the programs that the INSET organization is going to be implementing is looking at urban regeneration. The tragedy that happened in Tamil with the fire is a tragedy that didn't need to happen. And so looking at building working with a neighborhood to build safe buildings, to refurbish old buildings into new buildings and tear down and rebuild badly designed, badly built buildings, and having proper space so that emergency vehicles can get in and out is really something that we're focusing on. And it needs to be done. If it had been done, the tragedy in Tamil might not have happened.
Yeah. How does it normally work? Because when you have cities which aren't planned, which has been there for ages, and I assume that there's certain limitations that you can't, like, demolish all the existing infrastructure and create new ones. Globally, how does it work? If you've already got an infrastructure that is not very friendly for disaster management, say for example, like taking an example of Tamil, where there are like enough buildings already and it's probably not practically possible to take few of them out or do something about it. What do you think would be the solution in these cases?
Again, it would be great to have my colleagues at INSET to respond to questions like that, because it's an excellent question. My sense is, and again, in listening to them talk, while it may not be, as you said, looking at historical buildings and how do we maintain the culture and the history of an area, is it feasible to tear buildings down and rebuild? What I'm understanding is that, in fact, it is feasible. That there's issues of what to do when you're going through this urban regeneration process, which is to build culturally appropriate buildings. So you're maintaining the culture of the architecture, but also building them safe. And we have ways of being able to design a program in which it's cost effective for the landowners and that they'll recoup their costs within 3 years, et cetera, et cetera. It's a challenge to try to implement such a large-scale program, but fundamentally that may be the only option, because living with what exists right now, and if in fact there is a disaster, too many lives are going to get lost to be protecting the narrow alleyways and buildings that are not safe.
Yeah, that's true. Well, as a layman, I think a normal guy walking on the street would think that this is all up to the state to ensure that our lives are safe and secured. But how does the private sector come into the scene in this regard? What could be their contribution in disaster risk management? How crucial is it?
It's very important, and the reason I say that is because our experience as just a U.S. government donor to do activities like this, to work in partnership with World Banks and IMFs and other donor organizations and NGOs and technical organizations and the government to implement our activities. One of the groups that we haven't worked with as well as we could have been working with is the private sector. And everything that we talk about, if we're talking about safe housing, for instance, if